When you build your first real house, make the door red. That way I'll always know it's yours." Those words hit Tessa Moreno like a freight train as she stood in the hallway of Rhodes and Castellano architecture, staring through the glass wall of the corner office. She'd been a temp receptionist for exactly 14 minutes. Her lanyard was still warm from the printer. Her coffee hadn't cooled. And there, on the wall behind the lead architect's drafting table, framed in simple black wood, hung a child's drawing of a house with a red door. She knew that drawing. She knew the crooked chimney, the too big sun in the corner, the row of flowers that looked more like lollipops. She knew it because 22 years ago, in the arts and crafts room of the Glenmore Group Home for Children, she had drawn it with a set of broken crayons for a boy who couldn't stop stuttering long enough to ask for a glass of water. The coffee slipped from her hand. It hit the tile floor and exploded in a brown starburst across the hallway. Two paralegals from the office next door glanced over, annoyed. Tessa didn't notice. She was 10 years old again, sitting cross-legged on a basement floor, handing a piece of construction paper to a boy with bruised knees and frightened eyes. Callum Rhodes walked past her 3 minutes later, surrounded by two junior associates carrying rolled blueprints. He was tall, lean, the kind of put-together that came from tailored shirts and early mornings. At 36, he had already been profiled twice in Architectural Digest, the youngest senior partner in the firm's history. The man who had redesigned the Baltimore waterfront and turned a condemned warehouse district into the most sought-after living space on the East Coast. He stepped around the coffee puddle without looking down. His eyes never touched her face. But Tessa saw his left hand, the one not holding a phone, drift to his keychain clipped to his belt loop. On it, between a fob for a German car and a gym membership tag, hung a small clay pendant, no bigger than a thumbnail. A tiny house. Painted blue, cracked down the middle and glued back together. She had made that too. That night, Tessa sat on the bathroom floor of her apartment while her daughter slept in the next room. The apartment was small, a one-bedroom in Parkville where the radiator knocked like someone was trapped inside the walls, and the shower only gave hot water between 6 and 8 in the morning. She'd taken the temp job because rent was 3 weeks late, and the staffing agency had called at 7 a.m. with an opening that paid $19 an hour. She hadn't known the name of the firm until she walked through the glass doors and saw it etched into the lobby wall. Rhodes and Castellano. Her chest had tightened, but she told herself it was a coincidence. Rhodes was a common name. It didn't have to be him. Then she saw the drawing. Mika appeared in the bathroom doorway, dragging her stuffed rabbit by one ear. The girl was 6, small for her age, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn jaw, though Tessa tried not to think about that. Diego had left before Mika turned 2. No forwarding address, no child support, no explanation beyond a text message that said, "I can't do this anymore," sent from a bus station in Tucson. "Mama, why are you sitting on the floor?" Tessa wiped her eyes quickly. "Just thinking, baby. You're thinking too loud. I can hear it through the wall." Tessa pulled her daughter onto her lap and breathed in the smell of strawberry shampoo and toothpaste. Mika settled against her chest, already half asleep. "Mama? Yeah? Are you sad or happy?" "I don't know yet." "That's okay." Mika yawned. "Sometimes I don't know either." The memories came whether Tessa wanted them or not. Glenmore Group Home, Western Maryland, 22 years ago. Tessa was 8 years old, the oldest girl in a house that held 14 children and 2 overwhelmed supervisors. She had been in the system since she was 4, moved 3 times already, and had learned the rules early. Don't get attached, don't cry where anyone can see, and never believe anyone who says this is your forever home. Callum arrived on a Wednesday in November. He was 9, skinny, with glasses held together by a piece of tape and a stutter so severe that most people stopped listening before he finished his first sentence. The other kids figured him out within an hour. They mimicked him at dinner, stretching out his words until the syllables sounded like broken machinery. One boy, Travis, made a game of it. He'd ask Callum questions just to watch him struggle to answer, then laugh so hard the table shook. Callum stopped talking. Not gradually, not in stages. He just stopped. For 3 weeks, he didn't speak a single word. The supervisors noted in their files. Selective mutism, likely trauma-related. They referred him to a therapist he'd see once a month, if the county could find one with availability. In the meantime, he sat alone in the common room, drawing houses on any scrap of paper he could find. Tessa noticed the houses before she noticed him. They were everywhere. Napkins, the backs of worksheets, torn pieces of cardboard. Always houses, always with too many windows and doors that were slightly too large, as if the buildings were trying to welcome everyone at once. She sat down next to him one afternoon without asking permission. She didn't say anything either. She just picked up a crayon and started drawing alongside him. A house with a garden. A house with a porch swing. A house shaped like a shoe, which made him look at her sideways. She kept going. A house with a swimming pool on the roof. A house where the chimney was a giraffe neck. He almost smiled. She saw the corner of his mouth twitch and something in her chest unlocked. After that, they drew together every day. He still didn't talk, but he communicated through the drawings. He'd sketch a house with a crooked fence, and she'd add a dog jumping over it. He'd draw a window, and she'd fill it with faces, a whole family looking out. Slowly, through paper and crayons, they built a language that didn't require words. The day he finally spoke to her was in December. They were sitting in the hallway outside the supervisor's office, waiting to be called in for their monthly reviews. Tessa was drawing a house with a red door. She'd found a new red crayon in the craft bin, unbroken, and it felt like treasure. "Ooh, why red?" Callum asked. Tessa looked up. It was the first time she'd heard his voice in over a month. She didn't make a big deal of it. She'd learned that making a big deal of things scared them away. "Because red is brave," she said. "And houses should be brave." He thought about this for a long time. Then he said slowly, carefully, each word like a stone he was placing on a path, "I'm going to build houses someday, real ones." "I know," Tessa said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. For 2 years, they were each other's anchor. Tessa protected him from Travis and the others, not with fists, but with words. She had a sharp tongue and a sharper stare, and most kids learned to back off. Callum protected her differently. On nights when she woke up crying from dreams about her mother, he'd slide a drawing under her door. Always a house. Always with 2 people inside. Then came the morning that ended everything. A couple from Howard County had filed adoption papers for Callum. They were architects, both of them, and they had seen his drawings during a group home visit. They wanted a child who shared their passion, they said. They could give him a future. Tessa heard the news from a supervisor and spent the whole night in the craft room. She drew the best house she had ever drawn, a 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch, 6 windows, a garden full of sunflowers, and a front door so red it almost glowed. On the back, she wrote in her best handwriting, "This is the house you're going to build. Don't forget." She found him at dawn, sitting on the back steps, his bag already packed. His new parents would be there in an hour. She handed him the drawing without a word. He looked at it for a long time, his fingers tracing the red door. "I made you something too," he said. He pulled a small object from his pocket, a clay pendant, roughly the size of a quarter, shaped like a tiny house and painted blue with craft paint. It was lumpy and uneven. One side was slightly flattened where he'd pressed too hard. "I made it in art class. It's not good." Tessa took it and held it like it was glass. "It's perfect. P promised me something. Anything. When I build my first real house, I'll make the door red, so you'll know it's mine." Tessa felt her throat closing. "And when I find it, I'll walk right through that door, and I won't ever leave." They didn't hug. Kids in the system learned early that goodbyes were easier when you didn't hold on. But Callum reached out and squeezed her hand once, hard, and then the car pulled up and he was gone. Tessa was moved to a different group home 6 weeks later. She never saw him again, until now. Back in the present, Tessa stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The clay pendant still hung from a chain around her neck, hidden under her shirt. She'd worn it every day since she was 10 through 3 more foster homes, through aging out of the system at 18, through waitressing jobs and night school, and Diego and Mika, and every morning she'd woken up wondering if this was the day things would finally get easier. She made a decision. She would say nothing. She would answer phones, sort mail, finish her 3-month assignment, and disappear. Callum Rhodes had built the life he deserved. He didn't need a ghost from Glenmore walking into his glass-walled office and pulling him backward. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Over the next 2 weeks, Tessa learned Callum's rhythms. He arrived at 7:30, always carrying the same steel travel mug. He ate lunch at his desk. He stayed past 8, most nights, the last car in the parking garage. The junior associates admired him but kept their distance. He was known for being exacting, focused, and utterly private. No one knew where he'd gone to school before college. No one knew where he'd gone to school before college. No one knew about his childhood. He had constructed his past the same way he constructed buildings. Precisely, intentionally, with no wasted space. But Tessa noticed what no one else did. She noticed how he touched the clay pendant on his keychain when he was thinking. She noticed the red door on every residential project pinned to his office wall. She noticed the small things, how he always refilled the coffee pot when it was empty, how he held the elevator for the cleaning crew when everyone else let it close. And she noticed that on her 3rd day, he'd pause mid-step when he walked past the reception desk. Just for a second, his eyes had flickered to her hands, to the thin chain disappearing beneath her collar. And then he'd kept walking. He knew. She was almost sure of it. The confirmation came on a Thursday afternoon. Tessa was in the copy room when she overheard 2 HR coordinators talking. He asked for the temp receptionist's file again. The new girl? Moreno? That's the 2nd time this week. He's never done that before. Not even for full-time hires. Tessa left before they could see her standing there. So Callum was watching her the same way she was watching him. 2 people orbiting each other like satellites, close enough to feel the gravity but terrified of collision. The standoff would have lasted the full 3 months if not for Mika. It happened on a Friday. The school called at noon. Mika had a fever of 102 and needed to be picked up immediately. Tessa's usual sitter was working her own shift. She had no one else. She couldn't leave the desk unmanned. Not in her 2nd week, not when the agency had made it very clear that temps who caused problems didn't get called back. So she made the worst good decision of her life. She picked up Mika, brought her back to the office, and set her up in the break room with a blanket, a juice box, and strict instructions to stay put. Mika was 6. 6-year-olds did not stay put. Tessa was transferring a call when her blood went cold. Through the glass partition, she could see Mika standing in the main hallway, blanket dragging behind her like a cape, staring up at the framed projects on the wall with the focused intensity that only a feverish child could produce. And standing 3 feet away, looking down at her with an expression Tessa couldn't read from this distance, was Callum Rhodes. Tessa rushed over, already apologizing. "Mr. Rhodes, I'm so sorry." She was supposed to stay in the break room. Her school called and I didn't have anyone. "What's your name?" Callum asked. But he wasn't looking at Tessa. He was looking at Mika. Mika. The girl's voice was hoarse from the fever but unafraid. "What's yours?" "Callum. That's a funny name." Mika pointed at the wall. "Did you draw all these? I designed them. What's the difference?" Something shifted in Callum's expression. A softening, so slight that someone who hadn't spent 2 years learning his face would have missed it entirely. "Drawing is imagining," he said. "Designing is making it real." Mika considered this. Then she reached up and touched the nearest rendering, a sleek, modern home with floor-to-ceiling windows. How come none of them have a red door? The air in the hallway changed. Tessa felt it. Callum felt it. Even the junior associate walking past felt it, glancing over his shoulder before hurrying away. Callum's hand moved to his keychain. "What do you know about red doors?" "My mama says red doors are brave," Mika said simply. "She says somebody told her that a long time ago." Callum looked at Tessa then. Really looked. Not the glancing, evaluating look of an employer, but the deep, searching gaze of someone trying to find a face they'd memorized, inside a face that had memorized, inside a face that had changed. His eyes dropped to her neckline, to the chain, to the slight bump beneath her collar where the clay pendant rested. "Your daughter is very observant, Miss Moreno." His voice was controlled, professional, but Tessa heard it crack on the last syllable. "Please make sure she stays comfortable. The break room has a couch." He walked away, but Tessa saw his hands shaking as he pressed the elevator button. A week passed. Tessa counted the days by the number of times she caught Callum looking at her through the glass walls of his office, and the number of times he looked away before she could hold his gaze. 6 days, 14 looks, 0 words. Then the summons came. An email from his assistant, Mr. Barrow. "Rhodes has requested maintenance review of the reception area wiring. Please remain at your desk during the assessment. He will conduct it personally." He arrived at 6:15 after the office had emptied. He stood on the other side of the reception desk, hands in his pockets, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. "The wiring is fine," Tessa said. "I know." Another silence. The building hummed around them. Ventilation, the distant elevator, the sound of a city that didn't care about what was happening in this small glass room. "How long have you known?" Tessa asked. "Since your first day." "I saw the chain." He paused. "I drew that house on your necklace." "I know. You still wear it. Every day for 22 years. Callum leaned against the desk. In the fluorescent light, he looked older than 36, tired in a way that success couldn't fix. "The couple who adopted me. Martin and Joan Rhodes. They were good people. They gave me everything. Schools, opportunities, speech therapy. They never once made me feel like a project." "I'm glad. But they didn't know about you." "I never told anyone about Glenmore. I built this whole life." He gestured at the office, the blueprints, the awards on the walls. "And I kept that part sealed off, like a room in a house with no door." "Except the drawing," Tessa said, nodding toward his office. "You framed it." Something flickered across his face. "It's the only thing I kept, the drawing and this." He unclipped the keychain and held up the clay pendant. Under the lights, the crack down the middle was visible, the seam where he glued it back together. "It broke 3 years ago, fell off my desk. I spent an hour on the floor of my office with superglue trying to get the pieces to fit." "Why didn't you throw it away? Why didn't you take the chain off?" Neither of them had an answer that wouldn't break the careful distance they'd maintained. "I can't do this, Callum." Tessa stepped back. "You're a partner at this firm. I'm a temp. I answer phones and sort mail. This isn't a reunion. It's a disaster waiting to happen. Tessa, I'm not the girl from Glenmore anymore. And you're not the boy who couldn't finish a sentence." Her voice was harder than she intended, a wall going up. "We're different people." "Then why are you wearing the pendant?" She left without answering. The firm's annual gala fell on a Saturday in early April. Tessa wasn't invited. Temps didn't attend client events, but she'd been assigned to coordinate deliveries through the service entrance. 200 guests, a rooftop venue, champagne that cost more per bottle than her weekly paycheck. She was checking a catering manifest in the loading dock when she heard a small voice behind her. "Mama, there's a garden on the roof." Tessa spun around. Mika stood there in her pajama top and jeans, her stuffed rabbit under one arm, wide-eyed with wonder. "Mika Luisa Moreno, how did you—" "Mrs. Brennan fell asleep again. I took the bus. You took the—" Tessa pressed her hands against her face. Her 6-year-old had taken a city bus alone. She was going to have a heart attack and a parenting crisis simultaneously. Before she could react further, a voice cut through the loading dock. "Well, this is interesting." Derek Castellano. Callum's business partner and co-founder of the firm, stood at the service entrance in a charcoal suit that probably cost 4 months of Tessa's rent. He was 52, silver-haired, with the particular brand of politeness that wealthy people used as a weapon. "Ms. Moreno, isn't it? Our temp?" He looked at Mika with an expression that was technically a smile. "And who's this?" "My daughter. She wasn't supposed to be here. We're leaving." "No, no. Stay." Castellano's smile widened. He raised his voice so the catering staff could hear. "I think our guests upstairs would love to hear about Callum's little fascination with the front desk girl. He's been requesting your personnel file, did you know that? Asking about your background, your address, your daughter's school." Tessa went cold. Castellano continued, straightening his cufflinks with theatrical calm. "I've been watching for weeks. Private meetings, lingering looks through the glass. It's very touching, really. The star architect and the temp receptionist. But this firm has a reputation, and I won't have it compromised by whatever this is." He turned to the catering staff, who had stopped working to listen. "Make sure the board hears about this at Monday's meeting. If Callum wants to sabotage his career over, don't talk about my mama like she's bad." Mika's voice was small but fierce. She stepped forward, clutching her rabbit, her fever-bright eyes locked on Castellano with a fury that no 6-year-old should have been capable of. "She works really hard. She works harder than anybody. And she's not a front desk girl, she's my mama." The loading dock went silent. Castellano laughed, a thin, patronizing sound. "How precious. The child defends her mother. But, sweetheart, the adult world doesn't run on 'that's enough,' Derek." Callum stood in the doorway. He was in a navy suit, no tie, and his face was a mask Tessa had never seen before. Not the controlled calm of the office, but something colder and more dangerous. Castellano turned, still smiling. "Callum, I heard what you were doing." Callum stepped into the loading dock. Each footstep echoed off the concrete. "You are using a child to threaten someone who works for us. I'm protecting the firm. Our clients expect buildings that don't fall down. They don't care who answers the phone." Callum stopped directly in front of Castellano. "And if you ever speak to her or her daughter like that again, you won't need to worry about the firm's reputation. You'll need to worry about finding a new partner." Castellano's face reddened. "You'd throw away everything we built? Over what? Some woman from your past?" The question landed like a slap. The catering staff froze. Tessa held Mika against her side, feeling the girl's heart hammering through her thin pajama top. Callum was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the clay pendant. It sat in his palm, small and cracked and absurd against the backdrop of the gala happening above them. "When I was 9 years old," he said quietly, "a girl in a group home drew me a picture of a house with a red door. She was the first person in my life who didn't treat me like I was broken. She didn't try to fix my stutter. She just sat down next to me and started drawing." He looked at Tessa. She looked back at him. "She told me red doors were brave, and I've put a red door on every house I've ever built since. Not because it's a design choice, because it's a promise." Castellano stared at the pendant. "You're telling me this is about a childhood crush? A piece of clay? Callum, you're a grown man. This is a billion-dollar portfolio. It's about the only person who ever saw me before I was worth seeing." Callum set the pendant down on a catering table, gently, next to the champagne flutes and the linen napkins. Then he turned to Tessa. "I should have said something on your first day. I should have walked up to that desk and told you that I've kept your drawing on my wall for 22 years, that I've carried this pendant every single day, that every red door I've ever designed was for you." His voice didn't shake. His stutter, gone for decades, didn't return, but his eyes were wet. "I didn't say anything because I was afraid. I built this whole career, this whole life, and I was terrified that if I let you back in, I'd have to admit that none of it filled the space you left. Tessa felt something shatter inside her. The wall she'd been building since she was 10 years old, the one that said, don't get attached, don't hope, don't believe anyone who promises to stay. It came down so fast she almost couldn't breathe. Castellano looked between them, calculating. If you do this, Callum, the board can have my resignation in the morning. Callum said it the way he said everything, precisely, intentionally, with no wasted space. I'll keep the pendant. They can keep the portfolio. He picked up the clay house from the table and walked to Tessa. He took her hand, rough, calloused from years of work that no one at Disgallo would ever do, and placed the pendant in her palm. It was warm from his pocket. I think this belongs with you, he said. It always did. Tessa looked down at the tiny blue house in her hand, cracked and glued, and somehow still whole after 22 years. You idiot, she whispered. I already have mine. She pulled the chain from under her collar. The matching pendant hung there, slightly more worn, the blue paint faded to almost gray. Two halves of the same afternoon in an arts and crafts room, made by children who didn't know yet how heavy the world could get. Mika tugged on Callum's jacket. He looked down. Are you the house man? She asked. The what? Mama has a picture in her wallet. A house with a red door. She says somebody drew it for her a long time ago, and someday she's going to find the door and walk through it. Mika studied him with the uncomplicated certainty of a child. Is it your door? Callum knelt down so he was eye level with her. Yeah, he said. It's my door. Good. Mika nodded, satisfied, because Mama's been looking for a really long time. Castellano watched all of this with the expression of a man who had just realized he was standing in the wrong story. He straightened his jacket, muttered something about the board meeting, and disappeared through the service entrance. Neither Callum nor Tessa noticed him leave. That night, Tessa sat on the floor of her apartment, Mika asleep in the next room, and stared at the two clay pendants side by side on the kitchen table. One blue, one faded, both cracked, both kept. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. I handed in my letter tonight, effective in 30 days. She typed back, you didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. I spent 22 years building things for other people. I think it's time I built something for us. 3 dots appeared then. Red door, obviously. She laughed so hard she woke Mika up. 9 months later, they stood in the front yard of a house in Silver Spring, Maryland. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't a penthouse. It was a 3-bedroom fixer-upper with a porch that sagged on one side and a backyard that was more dandelions than grass. But it had a red door, bright and glossy, freshly painted that morning by Callum, while Mika directed from her lawn chair like a 6-year-old foreman. The wedding had been small. A courthouse ceremony, a few friends, a flower girl who kept dropping petals before she reached the aisle because she wanted to make sure every inch of floor was covered. No press coverage, no magazine profiles, just 2 people who had spent 22 years finding their way back to each other, and a girl who had always known they would. Tessa stood on the porch, watching Callum chase Mika across the yard, both of them laughing in the way that people laugh when they've stopped being afraid. On the wall inside, next to the family photos and Mika's school art, hung 2 framed pieces. The first was a child's drawing of a house with a red door, its edges soft with age. The second was a new drawing, done in crayon by a 6-year-old hand. 3 figures standing in front of a house, a tall man, a woman with dark hair, a small girl between them, holding both their hands. Above the house, in wobbly letters, Mika had written, Home. Callum caught her watching through the screen door. What are you thinking? He called. Tessa looked at the red door, at her daughter, at the man who had once been a silent boy with broken glasses and a dream too big for the world he'd been given. I'm thinking about promises, she said, and how the good ones don't expire. Callum walked over and sat beside her on the porch steps. The 2 clay pendants hung from the same chain around Tessa's neck now, clicking softly against each other in the breeze. 22 years, he said. worth every single one. Inside, Mika was taping something to the refrigerator. It was a new drawing, one she'd been working on all week. A house with a bright red door, two people on the porch, a girl in the yard, and above it all, a sun so big it barely fit on the paper, because in Mika's world, the light was always enough to reach everyone. Some promises don't come with a timeline. They don't arrive on schedule, or in the shape you expected. They come as a clay pendant carried in a pocket for 2 decades, a child's drawing framed on an office wall, a red door that says, "I kept my word. I'm still here." Walk in, and if you're holding on to something like that, a promise, a drawing, a name you haven't spoken in years, hold on a little longer. You never know when the door finally opens.